They said we were insane. Not reckless, not bold. Insane. The word echoed across the halls of the Federation, whispered in the strategies of alien admirals, and spat with contempt by empires who could not understand us. To them, our actions defied logic. To them, humanity's choices were not strategy, but madness. And maybe they were right. Because what other species would throw themselves into unwinnable battles, charging against fleets that outnumbered them 10 to 1? What other species would build colonies on planets where the air was poison, where the storms tore cities apart, and where survival was measured in minutes rather than years? What other species would fight wars not to conquer, not to expand, but simply because surrender was never an option? We did. Humans. The ones who had crawled out of their own fragile cradle, who had faced extinction more times than they could count, and who had survived not by avoiding chaos, but by embracing it. The first time the galaxy saw us fight, they thought it was desperation. A minor colony world, barely armed, facing a Dominion assault. The alien fleet should have crushed them in hours. But instead the humans fought back with traps built from mining equipment, with ships held together by little more than duct tape and fury, with soldiers who fought until their bodies gave out. The Dominion won that battle, but it was not a victory. Their fleets limped away, scarred and battered, haunted by the screams of human soldiers who charged through fire without hesitation. The galaxy saw the aftermath, and the word spread like wildfire. Insane. But insanity had its own power. The Federation had always relied on logic, order, predictability. Battles were calculated, victories assured by mathematics. Every war followed the same script: superior numbers, overwhelming force, inevitable submission. But humanity refused to follow the script. We tore the pages apart and wrote our own. When alien fleets expected us to retreat, we advanced. When they expected us to fight for survival, we chose destruction that dragged them down with us. When they believed surrender was inevitable, we laughed and kept fighting, and in those moments, the galaxy realized something terrifying. Insanity worked because madness and unpredictability broke their order. Their fleets, built for precision, stumbled when faced with chaos. Their soldiers, trained for control, faltered when faced with relentless, illogical defiance. Their admirals, who believed in flawless strategies, hesitated when humans defied every expectation. Insanity became our weapon. The Battle of Dairos was the first time humanity truly earned the title. Surrounded on all sides by an alien armada, outgunned and outnumbered, the human fleet should have surrendered. Instead, their commander ordered the unthinkable: charge the center of the enemy fleet. Every alien strategist called it suicide. Every witness called it madness. But that mad charge shattered the enemy's formation, creating chaos so complete that the humans escaped with half their ships intact. The reports spread, and once again, the word echoed: insane. But what the galaxy did not understand was this. To us, it was not insanity. To us, it was survival, because humanity had always lived this way. On Earth, we had faced plagues, wars, and disasters that should have ended us. We had stared extinction in the eye and laughed. We had built empires in deserts, thrived in frozen wastelands, and turned barren rocks into homes. Madness was not new to us. It was who we were. The aliens looked at us and saw recklessness. But in truth, we saw freedom. Freedom to fight without rules. Freedom to defy inevitability. Freedom to choose death on our own terms rather than life on someone else's. That was why we survived. That was why we won. Because when the galaxy calculated every possibility, they never calculated insanity. And yet, that was our greatest weapon. They called us insane, but that was the reason we terrified them. That was the reason they could never defeat us. That was the reason humanity became the storm that shattered their order. And as the galaxy would soon learn, insanity was not our weakness. It was our strength. The galaxy thought the Battle of Dairos was a fluke, a desperate move that happened to succeed. Alien commanders reassured themselves that humanity's so-called insanity was nothing more than luck. But then it happened again, and again, and again. The Battle of Veyron was supposed to end the human threat, An entire Dominion fleet surrounded a small convoy of human transports, cutting off their only escape route. Logic dictated surrender, but the humans did not surrender. Instead, they turned their transports into weapons. Civilian ships loaded with fuel and explosives rammed into Dominion cruisers at point-blank range, detonating with fire that consumed the battlefield. The convoy was lost, yes, but half the Dominion fleet burned with them. The aliens who survived did not speak of victory. They spoke of horror. They spoke of humans laughing as they steered their doomed vessels into enemy hulls, of captains smiling before igniting the charges that consumed them. That image spread faster than any report, carving itself into the galaxy's memory. "They are insane," the Dominion admiral had whispered in his debriefing. "They embrace death as if it is nothing." It was not nothing. It was everything, because humanity had learned long ago that death was inevitable. On Earth we had faced it every day. Wars, plagues, disasters, death had always stalked us. But instead of fearing it, we learned to live alongside it. And when death came for us, we learned to make it count. That was what the galaxy could not understand. For them, survival was the goal. For us, survival was only part of the story. Meaning mattered more. Victory mattered more. Defiance mattered more. And if that meant dying in fire, then so be it. The Federation began to study us. They wanted to understand this madness. Reports were compiled, dissecting every human victory. Patterns were searched for, probabilities calculated, strategies rewritten. But there was no pattern, no probability, no strategy that could predict us. Because how do you predict madness? One alien scholar compared us to storms. A storm does not think. A storm does not reason. It simply destroys. To fight humanity is to fight the hurricane. But even that description fell short, because storms did not choose their path. We did. The siege of Altheris proved this truth beyond doubt. A human garrison, hopelessly outnumbered, was ordered to hold until reinforcements could arrive. The aliens believed it would be easy. They had studied human tactics, prepared for traps, even braced for suicide runs. What they did not prepare for was silence. For 3 days, the humans made no move, no resistance, no counterattacks. The aliens began to believe the defenders had fled or surrendered. Then, on the 4th day, the humans struck, not from the walls but from beneath. Entire squads had tunneled under the alien encampments, emerging in the dead of night like wraiths. Explosives detonated across the siege lines. Communications collapsed and chaos erupted. By dawn, the aliens had withdrawn, leaving behind burning equipment and broken morale. One survivor's report simply said, "They do not think like us. They are insane." But what they called insanity was simply humanity's refusal to play by the rules. We never fought where we were supposed to. We never surrendered when we were supposed to. We never died when we were supposed to. And in every battle, the galaxy's fear grew. It was not just soldiers who whispered about us now. It was civilians. It was leaders. It was entire empires. The word insane became synonymous with human. And with that word came dread, because if humanity was insane, then no calculation, no strategy, no order could ever contain us. The Federation Council grew uneasy. Their admirals argued for extermination, wipe humanity out before the infection of chaos spread too far. But others warned against it. For every human they killed, 100 more stories were born. And those stories inspired rebellion across the galaxy. Because madness was contagious. Rebel groups began to adopt human tactics. Colonies began to whisper of defiance. Soldiers once loyal to the Federation asked themselves, if humans could fight the impossible, why could they not? The galaxy was beginning to unravel, and humanity had not even intended it. We were simply surviving the only way we knew how, through madness, and in that madness, we were winning. The Dominion, humiliated time and again, finally declared what they called the final purge. They would wipe humanity from existence, not with surgical strikes or containment, but with annihilation. Entire fleets were mobilized, dozens of worlds targeted, every resource bent toward one goal, the extermination of Earth's children. To the galaxy it seemed inevitable. The numbers spoke clearly. Humanity was outmatched in ships, weapons, soldiers, and supply chains. No logical species could survive such overwhelming force. But humanity was not logical. Humanity was insane. The purge began with fire. Orbital bombardment scorched colonies, turning forests to ash, oceans to steam. Cities collapsed in clouds of smoke, and billions of lives were lost. Any other species would have broken under such horror. Any other species would have bent their knee and begged for mercy, but humans did not beg. On Carrion Prime, when Dominion dropships descended to occupy the ruins, they found themselves under constant attack, not from organized armies, but from children with makeshift explosives, from farmers with blades, from engineers who had turned irrigation systems into weapons. Every street corner, every collapsed building, every shadow held defiance. The Dominion reported victory after victory, but their casualty lists grew longer with each passing day. Their commanders could not comprehend how an enemy that had lost everything still fought as if they had everything left to gain. One general recorded in frustration, "We burned their homes, and they fought harder. We destroyed their armies, and they created new ones from civilians. We annihilated their cities, and the rubble itself rose against us. What kind of species does this?" The answer, whispered across the galaxy, was always the same. Humans. Then came Earth. The Dominion knew Earth was not just a world, it was a symbol. If humanity's home was destroyed, surely their spirit would collapse with it. Entire armadas converged on the Sol system, blotting out the stars with metal and fire. But Earth was ready. The humans had no hope of winning a conventional battle. They knew that. Instead, they turned the war into something the Dominion could not endure. Chaos. Civilian ships charged headlong into battleships, exploding in brilliant bursts that tore through enemy lines. Orbital stations were rigged with self-destruct sequences, detonating as soon as enemy forces boarded them. Even the moon was transformed into a weapon, bristling with hidden cannons and mines. And when the Dominion finally descended to Earth's surface, they found a nightmare. Entire cities had been abandoned and rigged as traps. Streets collapsed into fire pits. Towers detonated in cascading avalanches of steel and stone. The humans did not defend their homes, they sacrificed them, turning every loss into a weapon. It was not just soldiers fighting. It was everyone. Doctors who strapped bombs to their bodies rather than be taken. Teachers who lured Dominion squads into ambushes. Old men and women who stood unarmed, daring the aliens to advance, buying time with their lives. To the Dominion, it was insanity. To humanity, it was survival. The siege of Earth dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Weeks turned to months. Supplies dwindled, morale faltered. For the Dominion soldiers, nightmares began to grow. They whispered of human screams that never ended, of shadows that moved when they should not, of enemies who fought long after their bodies should have collapsed. It was not just the humans' weapons that terrified them, it was their will. In one battle, a single human squad held a ruined bridge for 3 days against an entire Dominion regiment. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found only corpses. Each man and woman having fought until the very end, their weapons empty, their blades broken, their fists bloodied. But the bridge still stood. Stories like these spread faster than the Dominion could suppress them, and with each story, the galaxy trembled. The Dominion had come to destroy humanity. Instead, they had unleashed a legend, because every act of human defiance became fuel for rebellion across the stars. Oppressed colonies whispered, "If humans can defy the impossible, so can we." Resistance movements grew stronger, inspired by tales of Earth's madness. Entire fleets mutinied, refusing to fight against a species so terrifying, so unyielding, so alive. The more the Dominion tried to crush humanity, the more powerful humanity became, not in numbers, not in weapons, but in fear. Fear had become our greatest weapon. Fear of the species that would rather die laughing in flames than surrender quietly. Fear of the insanity that could not be contained, reasoned with, or exterminated. The Dominion had unleashed something far greater than they ever imagined, a symbol, and symbols cannot be destroyed. Fear spreads faster than fire. The Dominion had unleashed destruction upon Earth, but in doing so, they had planted seeds they could not control. Across the galaxy, oppressed species whispered stories of humanity's defiance. Stories that sounded like myths, but were all too real. A mining colony, enslaved for centuries by the Dominion, heard how humans turned their ruins into weapons and dared to resist an empire that spanned half the galaxy. And for the first time in generations, those miners raised their picks and struck against their overseers. On a trade world deep within Dominion space, civilian broadcasts captured smuggled footage of human resistance fighters charging into enemy fire, laughing as they fell, screaming defiance even as they burned. Those images spread like wildfire, reaching billions. The question on every alien's lips was the same. What kind of species does this? The Dominion tried to suppress the stories. They declared humans diseased, unstable, unfit for survival. Their propaganda machines churned out messages about human madness, human recklessness, human barbarism. But they made a fatal mistake by calling us insane. They gave us power, because what they called insanity was, to the oppressed, freedom. Freedom from chains, freedom from fear, freedom from the endless weight of logic that demanded obedience. If humanity could resist against all odds, then why not them? Small rebellions ignited across the galaxy. One world after another refused shipments. Others sabotaged Dominion supply lines. Some colonies, once too afraid to act, declared independence outright, and the Dominion began to fracture. The High Command was furious. How could a species so young, so primitive, infect the galaxy with such unrest? How could their destruction lead not to fear and submission, but to rebellion? The answer lay in the human soul. Unlike most species, humans did not measure survival in terms of logic. We thrived on defiance, on risk, on the thrill of standing at the edge of the abyss and daring to step forward anyway. Where others saw hopelessness, we saw opportunity. Where others saw certain death, we saw one last chance. It was this mindset, this so-called insanity, that spread like a virus, and the Dominion soldiers felt it too. In the field, reports grew troubling. Entire regiments refused orders to continue assaults against humans. Dominion soldiers whispered of curses, of nightmares, of a fear that gnawed at their souls. Some even defected, surrendering their ships to human forces. Others simply abandoned the war altogether, vanishing into the depths of space rather than face the madness of humanity again. It was during this time that humanity discovered its greatest weapon was not any gun, not any ship, not even Earth itself. Our weapon was reputation. Whispers of the insane ones spread faster than any fleet. To fight humans was not to fight a war, it was to march into a nightmare. And fear corrodes armies faster than any bullet. So the Dominion, desperate to prove their superiority, made a critical mistake. They launched their greatest offensive yet, gathering dozens of fleets to break humanity's resistance once and for all. It was meant to be overwhelming, undeniable. The kind of strike no species could survive, but they forgot. Humans do not play by the rules of survival. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, humanity shattered their expectations. Our fleet scattered, striking supply lines and retreating before overwhelming firepower. Small human strike teams boarded massive warships, planting explosives and laughing as they died to cripple engines the size of cities. Civilian freighters rammed battleships, detonating reactors in brilliant flashes of light. Every encounter was chaos. Every battle was madness. The Dominion tried to make sense of it, but that was their mistake. They sought logic where there was none. They tried to apply strategy where strategy had been abandoned. And in their confusion, their carefully planned offensive began to collapse. One Dominion commander, infamous for his brutality, sent a final transmission before his ship detonated. "We cannot fight them. They do not fear death. They welcome it." The word spread like wildfire. It was then that the galaxy began to see humanity not as victims, not as rebels, but as something more. Something terrifying. Something inevitable. We were not logical. We were not rational. We were unstoppable. Because when logic fails, when strategy collapses, when the odds are infinite, insanity wins. And in that moment, The galaxy began to realize maybe the humans were not insane after all. Maybe they were something worse, something the Dominion could never defeat, something that would reshape the galaxy forever. The Dominion had always ruled through order. Their empire spanned thousands of worlds, each kept in line by fear of overwhelming force. Their fleets were vast, their soldiers disciplined, their strategies flawless. For centuries, no rebellion had lasted longer than a single season. The very idea of resistance was unthinkable until humanity. Now the cracks were spreading. What began as whispers on the edges of the galaxy had become open defiance. Colonies once thought pacified rose in flames, their inhabitants chanting a name that had become legend: humans. The Dominion tried to extinguish these uprisings with overwhelming violence. But every time they deployed their fleets to crush a rebellion, they left other sectors exposed. And in those shadows, humanity struck. Human raiders became the ghosts of the galaxy. They appeared without warning, striking supply convoys, destroying communication hubs, vanishing before retaliation could arrive. Whole Dominion sectors reported fleets missing, starports in flames, command centers sabotaged by invisible hands. The Dominion called it terrorism. The galaxy called it inspiration. For species who had long been chained by logic and order, the humans showed another way. They showed that chaos could be power, that madness could be survival. And for those who had suffered centuries of Dominion control, the idea was intoxicating. Entire species began to join the rebellion, lending their ships, their soldiers, their knowledge to the growing firestorm. Not because they believed they could win, but because humanity had proven that defiance itself was a kind of victory. For the first time in its history, the Dominion was on the defensive. Its rulers grew desperate. Endless propaganda declared humans to be monsters, lunatics, a plague upon the galaxy. Yet every broadcast seemed to have the opposite effect. Because the galaxy had seen the footage, they had seen human soldiers fighting long after their bodies should have collapsed. They had seen civilians turning cities into traps, sacrificing everything with a smile. The Dominion could call them insane all they wanted. To the oppressed, that insanity was hope. Inside the Dominion's own ranks, morale began to fracture. Soldiers whispered that fighting humans was a death sentence, not because of their weapons, but because of their relentlessness. Entire battalions deserted rather than face human forces again. Others began leaking intelligence to the rebels, hoping to avoid the nightmare of a battlefield filled with human screams. One by one, Dominion fleets faltered, and humanity pressed harder. By now, Earth itself was little more than ash and rubble. Yet from that rubble rose fleets built in secret shipyards, weapons forged in stolen factories, soldiers trained in the ruins of burning cities. Earth had become a symbol, and a symbol was more dangerous than any fortress. In one of the most decisive battles of the war, a Dominion fleet of 50 warships entered the Yaris system, intent on crushing a human stronghold. They expected surrender. They expected begging. What they found was chaos. Civilian ships, hundreds of them, surged forward in suicidal charges, detonating themselves against enemy shields. Small strike teams slipped through the chaos, boarding ships, slaughtering crews, detonating cores. And through it all, the humans screamed their defiance. The Dominion fleet was annihilated, not because humanity had greater numbers, not because of superior weapons, but because the humans fought with a kind of desperation that logic could not predict. They did not retreat when cornered. They did not surrender when surrounded. They turned every hopeless situation into a weapon. It was after Yaris that the galaxy finally accepted the truth. Humanity had changed the rules of war. They were not fighting for territory. They were not fighting for survival in the way other species understood it. They were fighting to prove a point. That insanity, defiance and chaos could topple even the greatest empire. And as the Dominion began to crumble, the galaxy trembled, because they began to ask themselves a terrifying question. If humans could do this to the Dominion, what else were they capable of? The answer was coming, because the humans were not finished, not yet. The Dominion was breaking. Its fleets, once unstoppable, now limped across the stars, haunted by stories of human defiance. Its soldiers, once disciplined, now deserted in droves. Its rulers, once untouchable, now whispered of fear. But humanity was not done. We had not fought through fire and blood only to survive. We fought to win, and that meant tearing the Dominion down to its foundations. The final campaign began not with fleets, but with whispers. Rebellion spread through Dominion space like wildfire. Entire species rose in unison, emboldened by humanity's madness. Supply lines collapsed, communications fractured, and in the chaos, human fleets struck at the heart of the Empire. The Dominion capital, a jewel world surrounded by rings of warships, was considered impregnable. For centuries, enemies had dreamed of bringing it down, and for centuries they had failed. Its defenses were legendary, its fleets countless, its rulers merciless. But they had never faced humans. The human fleet that arrived was pitiful compared to the armadas of old. Scarred ships patched with stolen parts, weapons held together by desperation and grit. To any rational mind, the sight was laughable, yet the Dominion did not laugh. They remembered Yaris. They remembered Earth. They remembered the bridges held until the last breath, the cities turned into weapons. The soldiers who fought long after their bodies should have given up. And when the human fleet charged, screaming defiance into the void, the Dominion faltered. The battle was chaos. Civilian freighters rammed warships. Fighters dove into enemy hangars and exploded. Human strike teams boarded command ships, detonating themselves to cripple engines. Every move was reckless, every tactic suicidal, and every sacrifice opened the way. The Dominion's greatest fortress became a graveyard of its own making. One by one their ships fell, not because humanity had superior firepower, but because they could not comprehend fighting an enemy that did not value survival in the way they did. When the humans finally breached the capital's defenses, the galaxy held its breath. The Dominion rulers, proud and arrogant to the last, declared humanity a plague that must be eradicated. A mistake of evolution that could not be allowed to spread. They mocked our recklessness, our defiance, our refusal to obey logic, and humanity answered, not with speeches, not with negotiations with fire. The Dominion capital burned. Its towers collapsed. Its rulers were dragged from their fortresses, their screams echoing across the galaxy. And when it was done, humanity stood amidst the ashes. Bloodied but unbroken, the war was over. The Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, was shattered, not by superior numbers, not by greater technology, but by a species the galaxy had called insane. And the galaxy learned a lesson it would never forget. That what others called madness, humanity called survival. That what others called reckless, humanity called courage. That what others called insanity, humanity called victory. In the centuries that followed, stories of the war spread across every world. Children of alien species grew up whispering tales of humans who fought until their last breath, humans who laughed in the face of death, humans who turned hopeless battles into victories. We became a myth, a warning, a legend, and while the galaxy rebuilt, one truth remained etched into history. They called us insane, but that is why we won, because logic can fail. Strategy can crumble. Empires can fall, but insanity, the refusal to surrender, the madness of standing when every reason says to kneel, can change the galaxy forever. And humanity will never stop being insane, because it is in our blood, and it is why we survive.